The entire restaurant fell silent as Nsubuga slammed his hand on the table. "Get her out! Now!" The homeless woman stood frozen under the golden lights, thin, dirty, invisible until this moment. Security moved in. Guests whispered. Phones lifted. But she didn't beg. She looked straight at him. Deep, steady, almost tender. Then she whispered one word, "Subi?" Nsubuga's chest tightened. No one in this world knew that name, not anymore, and yet she said it like she had once held him when he cried. What would you do if a stranger suddenly knew the most secret name from your childhood, something no one else could possibly know? Do you think Nsubuga is right to throw her out? Or is he about to make the biggest mistake of his life? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your country right now. I read every comment. And if you love emotional, powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what happens next. Nsubuga had spent half his life making sure no one would ever look down on him again. His restaurant stood in the heart of Kampala's wealthiest district, where black cars glided past polished glass towers and the air smelled of perfume, roasted meat, and money. The sign above the entrance glowed in soft gold, Ekisa. Mercy. It was a name investors praised for its elegance, a name food critics wrote about with admiration, a name wealthy couples whispered when they wanted to impress someone important. Only Nsubuga knew how bitter the irony was. There was very little mercy inside him. By the time the last guest left that night, the staff moved around him with the careful silence of people who understood danger. They cleared crystal glasses. They folded linen napkins. They avoided his eyes. He stood alone in the dining hall, staring at the front door where the homeless woman had disappeared. "Sir," said one of his floor managers, "a young man named Tendo, should I call someone to make sure she doesn't come back?" Nsubuga did not answer immediately. His jaw was tight. His fingers rested against the edge of a table, tapping once, twice, then stopping. "No," he said at last. "If she returns, security will handle it." Tendo nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." But even after the staff had gone, Nsubuga remained there trapped by a single word. Subi. Hope. A childhood name so old and buried that even hearing it inside his own head felt unnatural. He had not spoken that name in more than 20 years. The people who raised him never used it. His school records never mentioned it. His business partners knew him only as Nsubuga Okello. To the city, he was a self-made restaurateur with refined taste, ruthless discipline, and a talent for turning shame into profit. Yet that woman had spoken the name without hesitation. Not as a guess, as a memory. He poured himself a drink from the private bar in his office and crossed the room in slow steps. His office was everything his childhood had not been cool. Leather chairs, dark wood shelves, a framed magazine cover with his face on it, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. He liked working there because everything was under control. Every object was chosen. Every line was clean. Nothing in that room belonged to chaos. Except one thing. From the bottom drawer of his desk, he removed a small cloth pouch faded with age. He held it for a moment before opening it. Inside lay a thin brass pendant on a worn thread necklace. Scratched. Cheap. Old. Worthless to anyone else. He rubbed his thumb across the back where a few letters had been clumsily etched by hand years ago. You. The rest had been worn away. He had been told it was junk. A meaningless trinket found around his neck when he was taken in. His adoptive father, Mr. Okello, had once laughed when he saw Nsubuga keeping it. "You built a future," the man had said. "Why are you still clinging to scraps from the gutter?" Nsubuga had never answered him. He had simply put the necklace away and learned once again that dignity often required silence. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He remembered almost nothing from before the Okellos, only fragments, rain on rusty metal, a woman's voice singing under her breath, the smell of smoke, a rough blanket wrapped around a small body, and hunger, endless hunger. He also remembered the story he had been given so many times that it had hardened into something like truth. A woman had abandoned him. That was what he had been told. A selfish, irresponsible woman from the slums had left him near a roadside church with nothing but a necklace and a fever. If not for the Okellos' wealthy, respected childless at the time, he would have died unnamed and unloved. They had saved him, fed him, educated him, opened doors that would have remained locked forever. And in return they expected gratitude. Always gratitude. At first he had given it freely. As a child he had worshipped his adoptive mother, Naledi, because she smelled of expensive soap and wore silk dresses that brushed against his cheek when she bent to kiss his forehead in public. He had admired his adoptive father, Solomon Okello, because the man shook hands with ministers and businessmen and made everyone around him stand straighter. In their large house, Nsubuga learned which fork to use, how to stand without slouching, how to hide emotion, how to smile at guests, and how to never speak about the years before he was rescued. But affection in that house came with conditions. Love was neat when guests were watching. Approval was given when he performed well. Warmth disappeared the moment he showed weakness. By 16, he understood something many children of privilege never had: to learn wealth did not erase humiliation. It simply dressed it better. He still remembered the first time he heard the truth hiding beneath the polished surface. He had returned early from school one afternoon and paused outside his father's study when he heard laughter inside. "Does he still ask about her?" asked a male voice. "A little less now," Solomon Okello replied. "Eventually they all stop asking. And if he doesn't?" A pause. Ice clinked in a glass. "Then he learns what the world does to boys whose mothers throw them away." The men laughed softly. Nsubuga had stood there motionless, his school bag slipping from his shoulder, something cold opening inside his chest. That day, he stopped asking questions. A week later, he got into a fight with another student who mocked him for being picked from the roadside. When the school called home, his father did not ask whether he had been hurt. He did not ask what had happened. He simply said, "Do not embarrass this family again." That sentence shaped him more than any lesson. He began to despise embarrassment more than pain. Years later, when he opened Ekisa, people called it his triumph. They said his success story was inspiring. Poor orphan rises, educated by generosity, builds a culinary empire, gives jobs to dozens, hosts celebrities and politicians. The newspapers loved it, but the story they told was too clean. What really built him was not generosity. It was rage. Rage at being pitied. Rage at being pitied and then controlled. Rage at the invisible woman who in his mind had chosen freedom over him. That rage hardened into a belief so deep he no longer noticed it. Poverty was not just suffering. Poverty was failure. Dependency was weakness. Need was dangerous. And anyone who stretched out a hand might be preparing to drag him back into the life he had escaped. That was why he could not tolerate beggars near his restaurant. Not because they frightened the customers, though they did. Not because they hurt business, though sometimes they did. But because each outstretched hand felt like an accusation from a past he had spent a fortune trying to bury. Outside his window, Kampala shimmered under the late-night haze, a city of prayers and hustles, of churches and corruption, of street vendors packing up at midnight while luxury apartments glowed above them like another country suspended in the sky. Nsubuga rose from his chair and crossed the room again, drink in hand. He remembered the woman's face. Not beautiful, not even fully clear in his mind, just sharp cheekbones beneath exhaustion, eyes too calm for someone being thrown out, eyes that had not cursed him, had not begged, had not trembled. That unsettled him more than anger would have. Most people feared him when he was cold. She had looked at him like she was grieving. A sudden knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." The door opened, and Naledi Okello stepped inside without waiting to be invited. Even in her 60s, she carried herself with the smooth confidence of someone who had never truly doubted her place in the world. Her dress was cream-colored. Her bracelets barely made a sound. "I heard there was an incident tonight," she said. He set down his glass. "News travels fast. It travels faster when one of my friends was dining here." She studied his face. "They said you caused quite a scene. A woman was trespassing." Naledi moved farther into the office. "A homeless woman." "Yes, and that required you to personally intervene?" Nsubuga's expression hardened. "Since when do you care about trespassers?" She held his gaze a second too long. "Since one of them left you shaken." He felt a flicker of irritation. "I'm not shaken. Then why are you holding that?" He looked down. The brass pendant was still in his hand. For one brief second, something unreadable crossed Naledi's face. Not fear, exactly, but not surprise either. Then it was gone. She smiled the way she smiled at charity galas and funerals, carefully, beautifully, falsely. "My dear," she said softly, "surely after all these years you're not letting some street woman stir up old fantasies?" "Fantasy!" The word landed like dust on a grave. Nsubuga closed his fingers around the pendant. "I know what I was told," he said. "Yes," Naledi replied. "And what you were told is enough." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Some people," she added, "appear when they smell success. Do not let desperation make you foolish." When she left the office, felt colder than before. Nsubuga stood very still. On the desk beside the untouched drink lay the worn pendant that had survived his childhood. On the other side of the city, somewhere in the dark, there was a homeless woman who knew the name engraved into his skin long before wealth gave him another one. For the first time in years, the story of his life no longer felt sealed, and the thing that frightened him most was not the possibility that she was lying. It was the possibility that she was not. The next afternoon, the lunch crowd at Akisa arrived dressed in silk linen perfume and self-importance. Government officials came in pairs. A pastor with a television ministry sat near the window with two businessmen. A young couple celebrated an engagement at the center table, where the light was flattering and the service discreet. Plates moved in elegant rhythm. Glasses chimed. Soft Afro jazz drifted from hidden speakers. Everything looked perfect. That was how Nsubuga liked it. He stood near the host's station in a charcoal suit, scanning the room with the sharp attention of a man who believed order was not natural, but enforced. The previous night had not left him. He had slept badly, woken early, and checked the security report twice. Nothing useful. The guards claimed the woman had vanished down the road before they could track where she went. No name, no details, no clear direction. Just absence. And yet her presence still clung to the restaurant like smoke. "Table 6 needs approval for the reserve wine," said Tendo, approaching with a tablet. "Approved. The food blogger from Nairobi confirmed for tomorrow. Move him to the terrace." Tendo nodded, then hesitated. "Sir, are you feeling well?" Nsubuga looked at him. "Why, you've been standing here for 20 minutes. That is called supervising." "Yes, sir." Tendo hurried away. Nsubuga did not blame him for the awkwardness. Everyone in the building sensed something had shifted, though no one could name it. That was the danger of a public scene. It traveled through walls. Staff whispered in kitchens. Drivers talked in parking lots. Receptionists passed the story to cousins by evening. By nightfall, half the district would know that the owner of a kisa had exploded at a homeless woman as if she had struck a nerve no one else could see. He hated that. He hated being readable. The front doors opened. A gust of hotter street air touched the cool interior. Nsubuga turned casually at first, almost irritated by the interruption. Then his body went still. She had returned. The same woman stepped inside with slow, careful feet, her dress hanging in faded layers around a frame made thin by hunger and weather. Her sandals looked half broken. Dust clung to the hem of her clothes. Yet her posture was not that of someone begging for mercy. There was exhaustion in her body, yes, but not submission. Conversations dropped around the room one by one. The hostess froze. One waiter stopped holding a tray steady, and Nsubuga felt heat rise under his collar. Tendo saw her too and rushed forward. "You cannot be in here," he said in a tight whisper. "Please leave before security comes." The woman did not look at him. Her eyes searched only for Nsubuga. "I am not here to cause trouble," she said. Her voice was low and dry. It carried anyway. Every nerve in Nsubuga's body sharpened at once. He forced himself to move before the silence thickened any further. He crossed the floor in measured steps, conscious of the guests watching, of phones already halfway lifted of the room, waiting to see which version of him would appear now, the polished businessman or the furious man from last night. When he stopped a few feet from her, he kept his face unreadable. "You were warned," he said. "Leave." A brief tremor passed through her mouth, not fear, but pain held tightly in place. "I only want water," she replied. "Just one glass. That is not my problem." The engagement couple stared openly. A woman near the window murmured something in Luganda to her companion. Nsubuga could almost hear the judgment being formed around him, but pride shoved it aside. He would not be manipulated in his own restaurant by a stranger in rags. "There's a public tap 2 streets from here," he said coldly. "Go there." The woman lowered her gaze at last. For 1 second he thought she might turn away. Instead, she looked back up and took a small step closer. "Do you still touch your necklace when you cannot sleep?" she asked. It felt as if someone had struck the center of his chest with a stone. He did not move, did not blink. The room around him seemed to fold inward. Tendo frowned. Sir Nsubuga barely heard him. No one knew about the necklace. No one. He kept it locked away. He had never worn it in public. Never mentioned it to staff. Never told friends. Even the Okellos had not seen it in years. The woman's eyes shone not with triumph, but with the unbearable softness of recognition. Then she spoke again. "Not sir. Not boss. Not Nsubuga. Subi." The tray slipped from a waiter's hands and shattered on the floor. Several guests gasped. Someone cursed under their breath. A child at table 9 began asking his mother what had happened. Nsubuga stepped back as if the word itself were dangerous. "Who told you that he snapped?" The woman flinched, not because he was loud, but because his voice carried panic now. "Who told you that name?" She swallowed. "No one told me." "Liar." Her face tightened with a brief flash of wounded dignity. "I carried that name in my mouth before you could speak it." The sentence hit him harder than the first one. A pressure built behind his ribs. He felt exposed, angry, trapped. That name belonged to a dark corner of memory he had sealed shut with years of discipline. To hear it spoken here under chandeliers between imported wine and polished silverware felt obscene. Like someone had dragged mud across a white tablecloth in front of the whole city. "Enough," he said. He turned sharply. "Tendo, water. Then get her out." Tendo blinked in surprise. "Sir, do it." A murmur rippled through the guests. Some looked relieved that he was showing restraint. Others looked more curious than before, sensing that the cruelty of the moment had given way to something far more interesting. Tendo hurried off. One of the guards approached from the entrance but stopped when Insubuga lifted a hand. For a brief, awkward moment, no one knew where to look. The woman stood quietly, breathing harder now. Close enough, Insubuga noticed details he had missed the night before: small scars near her wrist, grey, hidden in her hair, the faint outline of sickness in the hollows of her cheeks. She looked like someone who had walked too far for too long, with no one waiting at the end. "Why are you doing this?" he asked in a voice too low for the guests to hear. Her answer came just as quietly. "Because I ran out of time." The words slid under his skin. Before he could respond, Tendo returned with a glass of water on a tray. His hands were shaking badly enough that the glass trembled. The woman accepted it with both hands and drank slowly, as if forcing herself not to gulp. Halfway through, she closed her eyes. Insubuga hated that such a simple act could awaken pity in the people around him. He could feel it spreading through the room, rearranging the story already. No longer rich man versus trespasser. Now perhaps son versus history. Victim versus guilt. He despised uncertainty. When she lowered the glass, she reached into the torn cloth bag hanging at her side. Every guard in the room tensed. Insubuga stiffened, but she pulled out only a small, folded paper worn soft at the corners from being handled too many times. "I did not come to shame you," she said. "Take this. Then I will go." He did not move to accept it. "What is it?" "Something I kept. Why would I want anything from you?" For the first time, a spark of anger flashed in her face. "Because it was yours before anything in this place was." Silence again. Then slowly Insubuga took the paper from her fingers. Their hands touched for less than a second. His entire body went cold. There was something terrifying in how familiar that touch felt, not in memory exactly, but in instinct, like his skin knew something his mind did not. He unfolded the paper. Inside was a child's crude drawing, faded almost to nothing. A stick house under heavy rain. A woman with long arms. A small boy beside her. 3 badly written letters in one corner: SSU. His throat locked. He knew that drawing, not because he remembered making it clearly, but because he had seen it once before, in fragments of a dream rain, a low roof. Someone laughing softly as a child pressed charcoal to paper. "This proves nothing," he said, though the words lacked force. The woman gave a tired nod, as if she had expected that. "No," she said, "not yet." She stepped back before he could stop her. "But one day when the lies around you begin to crack, you will remember my face." Then she turned. The guards looked to Insubuga for instruction. He should have ordered them to remove her, should have ended it, should have protected what remained of his control. Instead, he stood frozen while she walked across the dining room under the gaze of strangers and slipped through the front door into the burning afternoon light. A phone camera followed her. Another followed him. Tendo bent to gather the broken glass from the floor, but even that sound seemed distant now. Insubuga stared at the drawing in his hand. 3 letters. Rain. A child. A name. His pulse hammered so violently that he barely noticed the manager approaching from behind. Sir Tendo whispered, pale and unsettled, "There's something else." Insubuga did not look up. "What?" "One of the older kitchen women. Auntie Rehema." Tendo's voice dropped further. "She says she recognizes that woman." That pulled Insubuga's head up at last, from where Tendo swallowed. "From years ago, sir. From the old neighborhood near the church where they said you were found." Insubuga felt the floor shift beneath him. Not visibly, not enough for anyone else to see. But deep inside the sealed walls of his past gave off the first unmistakable crack. Insubuga did not return to the dining floor after that. He walked back to his office with the child's drawing still in his hand, moving too quickly for anyone to stop him, too stiffly for anyone to mistake his state for calm. Behind him, Ekissa resumed its polished rhythm in fragments. Cutlery lifted, voices lowered, orders called into the kitchen, but the illusion had cracked. He felt it. The restaurant felt it. One ragged woman had walked through his carefully arranged world and left invisible fingerprints on everything. He shut the office door harder than intended. For several seconds he simply stood there staring at the paper. The drawing was so crude it should have meant nothing. A child's hand, uneven lines, rain drawn as heavy slashes, the crooked shape of a house. Yet it carried the strange force of something that had survived time, not because it was valuable, but because it had once mattered desperately to someone. He set it on the desk beside the brass pendant. The two objects looked absurd together. A businessman's office, a luxury restaurant, financial reports, reservation schedules. Beside them, the scraps of a life that had supposedly ended long ago. A knock came. "Come in." Tendo entered first, followed by an older woman in a clean kitchen apron and head wrap. Her name was Rehema, though everyone in the building called her Auntie Rehema. She had worked in restaurants longer than most of Insubuga's managers had been adults. She was reliable, discreet, and old enough to look at rich men without being impressed by them. Today, however, even she looked uneasy. "You said she recognized the woman," Insubuga said, not bothering with a greeting. Tendo glanced at Rehema. "Yes, sir." Rehema clasped her hands together. "I am not saying I am 100% sure," she began carefully. "It has been many years. People change. Hard life changes them faster. Did you recognize her or not?" Rehema inhaled. "I think I did." The words landed with more weight than he wanted them to. "From where?" "From Kisenyi side. Long ago. Near the church area." She paused. "There was a woman there who used to search for a little boy." Every muscle in his shoulders tightened. "What kind of woman?" "A poor one," Rehema said bluntly. "But not a drunk. Not mad. Quiet, always carrying old papers asking people if they had seen a child. She looked tired even then, like someone who had already lost too much sleep and too much hope." Subi. The name pulsed again inside him. He folded his arms. "And you think today's woman is the same person?" Rehema nodded slowly. The eyes, the shape of the face, and the way she looked at you. Her expression shifted. That was not a beggar looking at a rich man. That was something else. Tendo glanced between them nervously. "Sir, maybe it's nothing. Kampala is full of stories." "Yes," Insubuga said coldly, "and full of people who know how to use them." Rehema did not flinch. "That may be true, but I thought you should know." He said nothing. The office felt too small. Outside the window, afternoon heat shimmered over the city. Traffic crawled below. Somewhere a siren cried and faded. Kampala moved on, indifferent as always, while inside him something ancient and hidden strained against its chains. "Thank you," he said at last, though the gratitude sounded unnatural in his own mouth. "You can go." Tendo left quickly. Rehema lingered half a second. "Sir," she said softly, "some truths come dressed like shame before they show their face." Then she followed Tendo out, and Subuga stood alone again. He hated riddles. He hated old women who spoke like prophets. He hated the drawing on his desk, the pendant in his hand, the ghost name in his ears. Most of all, he hated that he was no longer certain what he was defending. By evening, he had made up his mind. Not to believe, to verify. That distinction mattered to him. He did not tell the police. He did not tell the Okellos. He did not tell anyone who might turn curiosity into gossip. Instead, he called a man named Pavulo, a former security consultant, who now handled discreet private work for wealthy clients who preferred silence over scandal. Pavullo arrived after sunset, tall, lean, wearing a plain shirt that made him easy to overlook. He entered the office with the unhurried confidence of someone who had spent years listening to lies for a living. "You said it was urgent," Pavullo said. "It is." Nsubuga closed the door, then handed him the drawing first, then described the woman. Her clothes, her face, her voice, the words she had spoken, the older kitchen worker's recognition. Pavullo listened without interruption. When Nsubuga finished, the investigator studied him a moment too long. "Do you want the truth?" he asked, "or do you want evidence that protects the life you already have?" The question irritated him immediately. "I'm paying for facts." "Good. Facts are less obedient than people expect." Nsubuga ignored the jab. "Find her, quietly. I want her name, where she sleeps, who she speaks to, whether anyone is feeding her information about me. I want to know if this is a setup. And if it isn't, then I want to know that too." Pavullo slipped the drawing into a document sleeve. "I'll start tonight." After he left, Nsubuga remained in the office long past closing time, but work was useless. He tried reviewing supplier invoices, tried checking next week's reservations, tried answering messages from investors. Every line of text blurred, every silence sharpened. When he finally returned to the Okello estate that night, the house felt exactly as it always had, too orderly, too quiet, too carefully curated. The guard but opened the gates. The garden lamps glowed over trimmed hedges. Inside, the marble floors reflected warm light and expensive furniture, chosen more for status than comfort. His adoptive father, Solomon Okello, was in the study. The older man sat with a glass of whiskey television muted, reading something on his tablet. He looked up as Nsubuga entered, his expression neutral but measuring. "I heard lunch was eventful," Solomon said. Of course he had heard. Nsubuga remained standing. "People talk too much. That is what happens when you run a public business and lose your temper in public." It was handled. Solomon set down the tablet. Was it the study smelled of leather, tobacco, and control? Nsubuga had hated that smell as a teenager. Back then it had meant interrogation disguised as guidance. Even now, as a grown man with his own money and reputation, stepping into this room stirred an old instinct in him, the instinct to brace for judgment before it arrived. "She came back," Nsubuga said. Solomon's expression did not change, but the pause before his reply was just long enough to notice. "The same woman, yes, and she knew things she shouldn't know." What things? Nsubuga looked at him carefully. A childhood name. Solomon's gaze cooled. Street people learn quickly. They watch. They listen. They invent connections if they think it will open a gate. She also had a drawing. A drawing from when I was a child. Solomon leaned back. Or a drawing meant to look like it. Nsubuga's jaw tightened. "You seem very certain." "I am certain of human nature," Solomon replied. "Desperation makes people inventive." The answer came too quickly, too smoothly. Nsubuga felt the first sting of real suspicion. Not vague discomfort, but something more dangerous. Not yet a conclusion, just the sense that the ground beneath the story was softer than it should be. "When you found me," he said carefully, "was there any report filed? Any attempt to locate my mother?" Solomon's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "We have discussed this before." "No, you told me a version of it. That is different." The room chilled. At length Solomon stood slowly, like a man refusing to be challenged in his own space. "You were abandoned. We took you in. We gave you a life. That is the beginning and end of what matters." Nsubuga held his gaze. "That is not what I asked. And I am telling you," Solomon said, voice sharpening, "that some questions are poison. You go digging in dirt. Do not complain when your hands come up filthy." There it was. Not concern, not compassion. Warning. Nsubuga had heard that tone before, whenever truth threatened comfort, whenever appearances mattered more than wounds, whenever his father wanted obedience without saying the word aloud. He said nothing more. He simply turned and left the study before the argument became something uglier. In his room, sleep did not come. Instead, memories moved at the edge of consciousness like shadows refusing shape. Rain hitting corrugated metal. A woman's arm around him. A rough lullaby. A church bell. Then another image, new or remembered, he could not tell. A road at dusk. Men's voices. Someone running. He opened his eyes at once, breathing hard in the darkness. The city outside was quieter now. A dog barked somewhere beyond the walls. A motorcycle passed on the road. From the bedside drawer he removed the pendant and held it until dawn. By the next afternoon, Pavulo called. "I found her," he said. Nsubuga's spine straightened. "We're not far from the old taxi park. She moves between two sleeping places. One is behind a shuttered pharmacy. The other is near a church compound when the guards allow it. People call her Namadzi." The name struck him with a strange force. It sounded solid, real, not invented on the spot. "Go on," Nsubuga said. "She's sick," Pavulo continued. "Bad cough. Weak. But clear-minded, not drinking, not using. And she carries a small metal box everywhere. A box. Yes, she guards it more carefully than food." Nsubuga looked toward the window, pulse quickening. "What's inside? I haven't opened it," Pavulo said. "But I saw photographs. Old ones. Of what?" A pause. "Of you, I think." For a moment, Nsubuga forgot to breathe. Pavulo's voice remained steady. "There's more. A church volunteer told me Namadzi has been asking about one man for years. Not just any man. A boy who was taken from her. She knew the school you once attended. Later she learned the name of your first restaurant job. She's been tracking your life in fragments." The office seemed to tilt. Outside, car horns blared faintly in the distance. Inside, there was only the roaring silence that follows a direct hit. She kept watching from far away. Pavulo said, "Never approached until recently. Why now?" "Because according to the volunteer," he hesitated, "she thinks she is dying." Nsubuga lowered himself into his chair very carefully, as if sudden movement might shatter something already cracked beyond repair. On his desk sat the brass pendant, the child's drawing, and now a name. Namadzi. Not a fantasy, not a faceless manipulator. A woman with a past, a sickness, a metal box, and photographs of him. His first instinct was still denial. His second was fear. But underneath, both deeper and more dangerous, something else had begun to wake. Recognition. For the rest of that day, Nsubuga functioned like a man walking through water. He signed invoices without reading them. He approved menu changes he would normally question. He listened to two managers argue over staffing and heard none of it. Every few minutes his mind returned to the same images with punishing clarity. The faded drawing, the name Namadzi, the metal box, the word dying. A woman had been tracking his life in fragments, not asking for money, not trying to blackmail him, just watching from the edges. It made no sense. Or worse, it made a kind of sense he had spent years refusing. By evening, the pressure inside him became unbearable. He left Akisa early and drove to the Okello estate without a driver, taking the curves too fast, barely noticing the city blur past his windows. Kampala after sunset was a city divided between glow and shadow. Luxury compounds lit like islands. Roadside vendors closing under bare bulbs, boda riders slicing between cars, children still selling peanuts at intersections, while men in suits checked their phones in tinted SUVs. Nsubuga had once looked at that contrast and felt satisfaction. He had made it across. He had escaped. Tonight, for the first time, the city looked less like proof of his triumph and more like a map of separation of those allowed inside and those left outside the gate. When he entered the house, he found Naledi in the sitting room overseeing flower arrangements for a charity luncheon. White roses, glass bowls, gold ribbon. She looked up with practiced serenity. "You're home early. I need to ask you something." She noticed his tone and dismissed the housemaid with a small motion of her hand. The maid disappeared at once. Naledi set down a stem she had been adjusting. "What happened?" Nsubuga remained standing. "Who was my mother?" Her expression barely changed, but the air in the room did. For a moment there was only the faint sound of the fountain outside and the distant clink of kitchen dishes. Then Naledi gave a small, weary sigh, the kind elegant women used when men became inconvenient. "We have discussed this," she said. "No. You told me a story. I want the truth. There is no difference." "There is," he said, sharper now. "There is a woman named Namadzi who knew my childhood name. There are photographs. There are people who remember her searching for me. So I'll ask again, who was my mother?" Naledi's fingers tightened around the rose stem. A thorn caught her skin. A bead of blood rose bright against brown skin and white petals. She stared at it, then calmly reached for a cloth. "That woman found you?" she asked at last. The answer was so controlled, so strangely chosen, that his pulse jumped. "So you know who she is?" Naledi dabbed her finger and did not meet his eyes. "I know enough to tell you this is a mistake." "Whose mistake? Hers? Yours? Fate's? Pick one." His voice dropped. "Why are you afraid of her?" That made her look up. And there it was, not fear exactly, but alarm, thin, fast, quickly hidden beneath offense. "I am not afraid of a homeless woman," she said. "Then why do you keep talking as if she's dangerous?" Naledi stood. Her grace vanished. In its place came irritation sharpened by old entitlement. "Because people like that drag ruin behind them," she snapped. "Because hunger teaches manipulation. Because guilt makes rich men stupid. Because you have built a life in Nsubuga, and I will not watch some woman from the street destroy it with tears and invented memories." "Invented?" He stepped closer. She knew Subi. Naledi fell silent. Not outrage, not confusion. Silence. It lasted only 2 seconds, but it was enough. Nsubuga felt something cold move through him. "How do you know that name?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "I heard you say it when you were small," she replied too quickly. "Children talk in sleep." "That is not true. You don't know what is true." The answer came from the doorway. Solomon Okello entered with the slow authority of a man who expected conversations to pause in his presence. He had likely heard enough already. He loosened his cufflinks as he crossed the room, eyes moving from Naledi's face to Nsubuga's. "This ends now," Solomon said. Nsubuga turned toward him. "Then end it with honesty." Solomon poured himself a drink before responding. He did everything like that, delaying just enough to show that time obeyed him, not anyone else. "You are upset," he said, "and upset people become dramatic. Did you separate me from my mother?" Naledi inhaled sharply. Solomon did not spill a drop. He set the glass down and faced his son fully. "No." The word should have settled things. Instead, Nsubuga heard what was missing around it. No explanation, no outrage, no demand for apology, just one flat denial, too clean to trust. "Then tell me how I came to you," Nsubuga said. "We found you near street, Bartholomew's church." "Who found me? A driver." "Name?" Solomon's expression darkened. That was years ago. You remember every man who ever served you when it suits you. A flash of anger crossed Solomon's face. Careful. No, Nsubuga said. I have been careful my whole life. He took another step. Naledi moved as if to interrupt, but neither man looked at her now. Did you report it to police? We handled it privately. Why? Because the system is useless. Did you publish my picture? Ask the church, ask the hospitals. Search for relatives. Solomon said nothing. That silence was louder than any confession. Nsubuga felt a pressure building behind his eyes. Not tears, never tears, but the raw heat of realization nearing form. You didn't, he whispered. We gave you everything, Naledi burst out. Everything food. Education, a name, protection. You were sick. You were half-starved. Do you think the world was waiting to save you? It was not, we did. Nsubuga looked at her slowly. A strange calm was beginning to replace his panic. Calm born not of peace, but of pattern. Pieces sliding into place. Words he had heard all his life rearranging themselves under a different light. Not we loved you. Not we searched. Not we tried. Always the same phrases: we saved you, we gave you, we made you. As if his existence had been an acquisition. As if gratitude could erase whatever came before. You keep speaking about me like property, he said. Naledi recoiled. How dare you? How dare I? He laughed once, a sound with no warmth in it. A woman has spent years searching for me while you told me I was thrown away. And your first instinct is not to help me understand. It is to protect yourselves. Solomon's voice hardened into steel. Because she is not your future. No, Nsubuga said. Maybe she's my past. And that seems to terrify you. Solomon crossed the room in 3 quick steps. He was older now, but still imposing, still carrying the force that had dominated boardrooms and households alike. Listen to me carefully. People from the gutter know how to exploit sentiment. This is how lives are ruined, one emotional mistake at a time. The sentence should have sounded practical. Instead, it sounded rehearsed. Something men said when they had once justified an unforgivable thing to themselves and needed to keep justifying it forever. Nsubuga held his gaze. What did you do? The question hung there. Naledi turned away, pressing the cloth against her injured finger. Solomon's jaw worked once. I gave you a better life. That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters. For a brief dizzying second, Nsubuga saw his childhood whole. The polished shoes, the gratitude lectures, the warning never to ask too much, the way every question about before had been met not with tenderness, but with impatience, the way shame had always circled his origins like a guard dog, not because the past was painful, because the past was dangerous. And then another memory rose from the depths, small, sharp, and suddenly unmistakable. He was maybe 8, standing on the upstairs landing late at night, hearing Naledi whisper to Solomon below, "What if someone asks later?" "They won't," Solomon had replied. "By then he'll belong to us." At the time, Nsubuga had not understood the sentence. He had thought adults simply spoke strangely when tired. Now it returned like a knife sliding free. He stepped back. Naledi noticed the change in his face. Nsubuga. But he was no longer looking at either of them. His attention had shifted to the doorway where an old man stood almost hidden in shadow. Mzi Kato. The Okello's longtime steward had probably come to announce dinner only to find himself frozen by the scene. He had worked in this house since before Nsubuga arrived. Grey now, stooped, invisible in the way loyal servants often become. But his face had gone pale, and his eyes held the terrible look of a man who had heard a lie repeated for so long that the truth had become a burden too heavy to carry quietly. "Kato Nsubuga said." The old steward lowered his gaze. Kato Nsubuga repeated more softly, "Look at me." Slowly Mzee Kato obeyed. Nsubuga saw it then. Not certainty yet, but guilt. Old guilt. Deep guilt. The kind that did not belong to bystanders. "What do you know?" Nsubuga asked. Solomon turned sharply. "Leave the room." But Kato did not move. Nalady's voice trembled for the first time. "Kato, go." Still he stayed where he was, breathing hard, hands shaking faintly at his sides. Nsubuga walked toward him. Every step felt like crossing a bridge that might collapse behind him. "Kato," he said, and now there was no anger in his voice at all, only something far more dangerous need. "Tell me whether the story I was given is a lie." The old man closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were full of grief. And before Solomon could stop him, before Nalady could speak over him, Mzee Kato whispered the words that split the room in two. "Sir, there is more you were never told." The room went so quiet that even the fountain outside seemed to stop. Nsubuga did not turn around. He did not look at Solomon. He did not look at Naledy. His entire attention locked onto Mzee Kato, as if the old steward's next breath might decide whether the life he knew would remain standing or collapse in a single night. Solomon recovered first. "Kato," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You are forgetting yourself." The old man trembled, but he did not lower his head this time. "No," Sir Kato replied, barely above a whisper. "I have remembered myself too late." Nalady set down the blood-stained cloth. "This is madness." Nsubuga spoke without taking his eyes off Kato. "Tell me." Kato swallowed. The tendons in his neck strained. He looked like a man about to step into fire because there was no clean way left to live. "I was there," he said. The words hit with brutal simplicity. Nsubuga felt a pulse of cold spread through his limbs. "There where the church Kato said. Not when you were found, when you were brought." Behind him, Solomon's glass slammed onto the table. "That is enough." But enough had already died. Nsubuga turned now sharply and faced his adoptive father. Brought, Solomon's jaw was rigid. "You are listening to an old servant who has lost perspective." Kato's voice cracked. "I have lost sleep, not perspective." Nalady stepped forward. "Stop this, all of you." But the truth had entered the room now, and it no longer cared about elegance. Nsubuga looked back at Kato. "Who brought me?" The old man's eyes filled. "Your mother came first." Nsubuga could not breathe for half a second. "She came to the gate of the old property," Kato said, each sentence dragged out of him like something barbed. "You were very sick." "Fever. She was desperate. She had heard Madam and Sir were looking for a child to adopt. She begged them to help you get treatment." Nalady's face lost color. Solomon moved fast, but Nsubuga moved faster. He stepped between them and Kato, not touching anyone, but making a line. "Continue," Nsubuga said. Kato's voice shook harder. "She said she would come back. She said she only needed help because she had no money and no one would admit him. She kept saying, 'Please save my boy. Please save Subi.'" The name landed like a blade through cloth. Soft. Final. Nsubuga stared at Solomon. The older man's silence was no longer authority. It was calculation. "You told me she abandoned me," Nsubuga said. Solomon's answer came measured, almost contemptuous. "She was incapable of caring for you. That is not what I asked. She left you. She came for help. She was chaos." Solomon snapped the restraint, finally splitting. Disease, poverty, instability. What difference does the wording make? You would have died with her. Naledi closed her eyes, as if the sentence itself had escaped too nakedly. Nsubuga's chest rose and fell once. "Did she come back?" he asked Kato. The old steward nodded, tears slipping free now. Yes. When the next day, and the next, and again after that. Nsubuga's mouth went dry, and Kato looked at the floor. She was turned away. The room seemed to tilt. No, Nsubuga said. He did not mean it as disbelief. He meant it as refusal, as if language itself should not be allowed to form around something so obscene. Kato nodded anyway. Sir said it would be better for the child. Madam said if the woman remained near you, she would drag you back into that life. They arranged for a priest to record you as abandoned near the church. It was made cleaner that way. Cleaner. The word tore through Nsubuga harder than any confession so far. Cleaner for paperwork. Cleaner for reputation. Cleaner for a wealthy couple who wanted a child without the inconvenience of a living mother who loved him enough to come back. He turned slowly toward Naledi. She was crying now, but even those tears enraged him. They came too late. They came dressed in self-pity. "You watched her beg for me?" he asked. Naledi opened her mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "You were ill. She was my mother. She had nothing." Naledi burst out. Nothing. No home, no money, no family name, no protection. "We could give you schools, doctors, safety, and so you stole me." The word struck her like a slap. "We saved you," she said again, but now it sounded smaller, uglier, stripped of elegance. Nsubuga laughed once, and the sound frightened even him. "There it is, that holy sentence, the one you used to excuse everything." Solomon stepped forward. "Enough. You are emotional. You are taking fragments and turning them into a crime." A crime? Nsubuga faced him fully now. "You forged my history. You let me grow up believing my mother threw me away. You built my gratitude on a lie." Solomon's eyes hardened. "And what did that lie produce? Look at you. Education, discipline, power, respect. Would you have any of that if we had handed you back to a woman sleeping in dirt?" The cruelty of it was breathtaking because it was so sincere. Solomon truly believed the result had justified the theft. That was the part that broke something final inside Nsubuga, not merely that he had been lied to, but that the lie had been cherished as wisdom. He took a step back from both of them, as if proximity itself had become unbearable. Fragments of memory began rising now, jagged and incomplete, but stronger than before. A woman running with him pressed to her chest. Rain lashing a tin roof. A fever dream of bright lights and strange walls. Then another image, far sharper than any before. A gate, a woman on her knees, hands folded, begging. He sucked in air. Naledi saw it happen. "Nsubuga." He ignored her. More came, a man's voice saying, "You should be grateful." A cloth tied around his neck, a woman crying out from somewhere beyond a door. His head throbbed. Kato took one hesitant step toward him. "Sir, please sit." But Nsubuga jerked away, pressing a hand to his temple. The room blurred. He was here in this rich sitting room with gold ribbon and roses and polished lies, and also somewhere else entirely small. Burning with fever, reaching for someone who was not allowed through the gate. He saw tiny fingers clutching a necklace. He heard a voice, female, hoarse, trembling, saying, "Subi, my son, I am coming back." Then another voice, colder, male. "Take him inside." He stumbled. Kato caught his elbow. "Sir," Nsubuga tore free and backed into the table, sending a vase of white roses crashing to the floor. Water spread across the tiles like spilled memory. No one moved. No one dared. He looked at Solomon with a face no longer merely angry. It was devastated now, raw, unmasked. The face of a son discovering that the wound defining his life had been carved by the very hands that claimed to rescue him. "You let me hate her," he said. Solomon said nothing. "You let me despise poor women because of what you did." Still nothing. Nsubuga's voice dropped to a whisper, more terrible than shouting. "You let me become cruel in the shape of your lie." Naledi began to sob openly. "We loved you in the only way we knew how." "No," he said. "You loved possession." The sentence silenced her. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was her broken crying and the drip of vase water onto marble. Then Nsubuga turned to Kato again. "Where is she now?" Kato blinked. "Sir, my mother." "Where is she now? I do not know exactly, but if it is the same woman from the restaurant." "It is." Kato nodded shakily. "Then maybe the church volunteers near the old taxi park know. She used to go there. I heard some of the drivers speak of a sick woman with a metal box." Nsubuga was already moving toward the door. Nsubuga Naledi called after him. He stopped, but did not turn. The whole house seemed to hold its breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat with exhausted fury. "Do not say my name as if you gave it to me." Then he walked out. The night outside hit him warm and hard. He did not take a driver. He did not call ahead. He got into his car and tore through Kampala as if motion alone could outrun the years he had lost. Traffic lights blurred, horns blared. Street vendors jumped back from the curb. He barely saw any of it. All he could see was a woman at a gate, begging, coming back, being turned away. His mother had not abandoned him. She had fought for him, and he had thrown her out of his restaurant like trash in front of strangers. The realization kept striking him in waves, each one crueler than the last. At a red light near the old market, he suddenly remembered something else. Not an image, a sensation. A hand smoothing his hair while he burned with fever. A song barely audible. A smell of soap mixed with smoke. He gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles ached. "Namazi," he whispered, hearing her name in his own mouth for the first time. It sounded less like a discovery than a return. By the time he reached the church compound near the taxi park, the sky was black, and the streets alive with their usual wounded energy engines, coughing men, shouting fares, children weaving through parked minibuses. He got out and went straight to the iron gate, where a tired volunteer in a faded sweater was locking up. "I'm looking for a woman named Namazi Nsubuga," said. The volunteer squinted at him, then recognition flickered. Not of him personally, of his suit, his car, his kind. "She was here this morning," the woman said, "but some men chased her from the sleeping area. What men? Local boys. They said she brings bad luck." "Where did she go?" The volunteer hesitated. "Toward the drainage road behind the shuttered pharmacy. But she was coughing badly. Could barely stand." Nsubuga did not wait for more. He turned and ran. Not like a businessman, not like a man preserving dignity. Like a son who had already arrived too late once and could not survive arriving too late again. The drainage road behind the shuttered pharmacy was not a place men like Nsubuga usually entered on foot. It was narrow, half-broken, and slick with the city's neglect. A sour smell rose from stagnant water and rotting rubbish. Corrugated metal leaned against walls like tired shoulders. A weak bulb flickered above a kiosk that had long since closed. Somewhere deeper in the darkness, a radio played an old love song with too much static. Nsubuga kept moving. His polished shoes sank into mud. His trouser hem caught on rusted wire, Twice he nearly slipped. He did not slow down. "Namadzi," he shouted. No answer. Only the scrape of rats, the mutter of distant voices, the hum of Kampala trying to survive another night. He rounded the back of the pharmacy and found 2 boys sitting on overturned crates sharing roasted cassava from a newspaper wrap. They looked up sharply when they saw him, wealthy suit, expensive watch face, too intense for comfort. "I'm looking for a woman," Nsubuga said. "Thin, sick, older. She may have come through here." The older boy narrowed his eyes. "Why? Because I need to find her." "That is not an answer." Nsubuga pulled out money. "Did you see her?" The younger boy stared at the notes, but the older one kept watching Nsubuga's face instead. Street children learned early that desperation often mattered more than cash. "She came," the older boy said at last. "The local men chased her from the church side. She sat by the wall there for some time. Then a Boda man helped her across to the old bus shelter." "Which shelter?" The boy pointed toward the road leading down to the market edge. Nsubuga turned at once. "Wait!" the older boy called. He looked back. "She was bleeding from the mouth," the boy said. "If you are going to be cruel, don't bother." The words cut through him because they were earned. Without replying, Nsubuga ran again. The old bus shelter stood crooked beneath a jacaranda tree, half its roof missing one side, tagged with faded political posters. A woman slept on one bench under a sheet of plastic. An old man coughed beneath the other. But Namadzi was not there. Nsubuga's chest tightened. He turned in a full circle, scanning shadows, gutters, doorways. Then he saw it. A small metal box tucked partly beneath the shelter bench, hidden behind a stack of discarded sacks. He went still. It was old. Dent in one corner, rust near the latch. The kind of cheap lockbox people used to keep papers dry during rainy seasons. His hands shook as he pulled it out. For one terrible second, he thought it had been abandoned. Then he heard a cough from behind the shelter. He moved around the side and found her crouched against the wall, one hand pressed to her chest, the other stained dark near her mouth. She looked smaller than before, as though the city had been filing her down for years, and tonight had taken more than usual. When she saw him, she did not look surprised, only tired. "You came," she said. The simplicity of it almost destroyed him. He dropped to one knee in the dirt, all thought of dignity gone. "You're hurt." "It is only the lungs." She tried to smile. "They have been angry with me for some time. Nobody told me you were this sick. You were busy hating me." The words were not bitter. That made them worse. Nsubuga swallowed hard. "I know." She studied his face in silence. Under the broken shelter light, her eyes looked older than grief itself. Yet there was no accusation in them now, only a terrible patience, as if she had spent years preparing herself for whichever version of him finally arrived. He held the metal box in both hands. "What is this?" "My foolishness," she said softly. "And my proof." Rain threatened in the air, though the sky had not yet opened. The old man under the shelter glanced over, once decided this sorrow belonged to someone else, and looked away. Nsubuga sat beside Namadzi on the concrete, not caring that his suit was ruined. "You should be in a hospital," he said. She gave a quiet laugh that broke into a cough. "Hospitals like payment. I can take you. Later." "No. Now." "Later," she repeated more firmly. "Because if I leave before you know, then your rich people will still have a chance to twist the story back into something clean." His jaw tightened. Even half collapsing, she still understood the danger. He nodded once. "Then tell me." She looked at the box. "Open it." He set it on his lap and lifted the latch. Inside were papers wrapped in cloth to keep them dry. Old photographs. A tiny knitted sock. A church receipt. 2 letters folded and refolded until the paper had softened like fabric. And on top of everything, a picture of a small boy with fever-bright eyes wearing a brass necklace. Nsubuga stopped breathing. It was him, younger than any memory he trusted, thin, wrapped in a blanket, looking at the camera with solemn confusion. He touched the edge of the photograph, as if it might vanish. "I kept every piece I could save," Homel3ss said. "Not because I wanted to hold you back, because I was afraid the world would swallow the proof that you were ever mine." His throat burned. "Why didn't you come for me publicly? Go to police, to newspapers?" She closed her eyes briefly. "You think poor women are heard because they scream louder?" He had no answer. "When I first came back," she continued, "I had no money, no husband, no family name anyone feared. Your father had cars, lawyers, friends in offices, friends in churches. He did not need to hit me. Men like that do not always use hands. They use doors that stop opening, papers that disappear, people who suddenly no longer remember what they saw." Nsubuga felt sick. "My husband had died 6 months before you fell ill," she said. "He left debts. Men came for what little we had. I worked washing clothes, carrying sacks, anything. Then you got the fever. I thought you would die in my arms if I kept you with me. Someone told me there was a wealthy couple looking for a child to foster while helping with treatment. I believed—" Her mouth trembled. "I believed help and kindness were cousins." The sentence hung between them. "I brought you to their gate," she went on. "The woman Naledi spoke gently at first. She touched your face. Said you needed a doctor quickly." The man asked questions. "Too many. Your name. My husband's name. Whether there were relatives. Whether anyone important would claim you if something happened." She laughed once without humor. "At the time I thought he was being careful. Now I know he was measuring how easy it would be to erase me." Nsubuga stared at the photograph in his lap until it blurred. "I came back the next day," Homel3ss said. "They told me you had been moved for treatment. The day after that, they said I should be grateful that generous people were caring for you. The day after that, the gate guard said if I returned again, police would take me." Her voice began to fray, but she kept speaking. "I waited near the church because someone whispered you might be there. Once I heard you crying from a car. I ran after it until I fell. Later a priest told me a child had been registered abandoned. Abandoned." She spat the word softly into the dirt. "That day I understood what rich people do. They take your child, then rewrite your grief until even God's paperwork agrees with them." Nsubuga pressed his hand over his mouth. Every accusation he had ever aimed at her now stood reversed and aimed at himself. But why stay away after he forced out? Why not keep fighting I did? A flash of steel entered her tired face. For years, until survival became its own war. I was chased, threatened, lied to. Once a man told me I should thank the Okellos because at least my son would grow up clean. Clean. Her eyes filled, as if my love had dirt in it. A drop of rain hit the metal roof, then another. Nsubuga looked at her, really looked at her, not as a symbol, not as a disruption, not as a problem standing under expensive lights. He saw the cost of every year, the hunger, the shame, the relentless refusal to forget him, even when forgetting would have hurt less. "I threw you out," he whispered. "Yes. In front of everyone. Yes. I thought you were trying to use me. You did." The honesty was unbearable because it was deserved. Rain began falling more steadily now, ticking against metal, darkening the dust around their feet. Nsubuga lowered his head. "I don't know how to ask forgiveness for that." Homel3ss studied him for a long moment. "Then do not ask for easy forgiveness. Ask for courage. It is more useful." He looked up, stunned by the answer. She gave the faintest smile. "You are my son. Even in your worst moment, I knew pride had eaten you before truth reached you. That is not the same as evil. But if you stop at guilt, then all this suffering teaches nothing." His chest tightened painfully. No one had spoken to him like that in years, not flattering him, not fearing him, not managing him. Speaking instead as though his soul still mattered. He opened one of the folded letters. The handwriting was shaky, but careful. "To whoever has my child, his name is Subi. He likes to touch the necklace when he is afraid. He sleeps better if someone hums. Please do not let him think I left because I did not love him." Nsubuga's vision broke. He bent forward, elbows on knees, and for the first time since boyhood, grief rose in him with no room left to hide. "I hated you," he said hoarsely. Namadzi's own tears slipped free. "I know. I built my whole life on hating you, I know. I became cruel because I thought cruelty was what abandonment deserved." She leaned weakly against the wall, breathing with effort. "Then stop becoming that man." A vehicle slowed on the road nearby. Men's voices drifted closer. One laughed. Another said something crude about the street witch. Nsubuga straightened immediately. Namadzi noticed. "It does not matter. It matters now." He stood and offered his hand. She looked at it, then at him. Not with certainty. Not yet. With fragile hope, too old to trust quickly. This time when he spoke, his voice held no command in it. Only promise. "Come with me, mother." And just as her trembling fingers reached for his headlights, swept across the shelter, and a familiar black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb. Nsubuga recognized it at once. It belonged to Solomon Okello. The SUV's engine purred beneath the rain like a predator pretending patience. Nsubuga did not need to see the license plate. He knew the vehicle by shape alone, the tinted windows, the polished black body, the kind of wealth that moved through poor neighborhoods as if dirt should apologize for touching it. The rear door opened. Solomon Okello stepped out, first umbrella already raised by the driver. Even here, even on a broken roadside beside a drainage ditch and a rusted bus shelter, he carried himself like a man entering a board meeting he intended to control. His shoes did not touch mud. His coat did not show rain. Behind him came another man Nsubuga recognized with a cold jolt, Councillor Bwaya, the family lawyer, narrow-faced and dry-eyed, a man who looked as if he ironed even his morals. So that was Solomon's first instinct. Not apology. Not confession. Containment. Namadzi's fingers tightened around the edge of the wall as she tried to stand straighter. Nsubuga moved instantly, putting himself between her and the road. Solomon stopped a few steps away and looked from his son to the metal box, then to Namadzi's face. His expression shifted only slightly, but Nsubuga saw it. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. That alone was another betrayal. "You should not be here," Nsubuga said. Solomon ignored the statement. "Get in the car." Rain drummed harder on the shelter roof. "No," Nsubuga said. Solomon's jaw set. "You are in a filthy roadside slum in the middle of the night with a sick woman and a box of old papers. This is not the place for emotional theater." Namadzi gave a short, weak laugh that turned into a cough. "There. That voice. Same voice from years ago. Always talking as if pain becomes less shameful when he insults the ground beneath it." Councillor Bwaya stepped forward. "Madam, let us keep this calm." "Do not call her madam," Nsubuga said without turning. "You have not earned the word." The lawyer fell silent. Solomon lowered the umbrella slightly and looked straight at Namadzi. "You were paid once to stay away." Nsubuga swung around. Paid Namadzi's face did not change. "A man came, yes. Not you. Never you. Men like you send others to carry your sins." Solomon's voice remained maddeningly composed. "You accepted the money." I used it to eat while I kept searching for my son. You accepted it, he repeated, as if survival itself were the crime. Nsubuga felt fury rise so sharply it steadied him. Is that your defense? He asked. That she was poor enough to need the money you used to silence her. Solomon looked at him as though he were being childish. My defense is reality. She could not raise you. We did. You stole me. I rescued you from a life that would have buried you. The sentence might once have shaken him. Not now. Nsubuga heard it clearly at last, the arrogance hidden beneath all the polished language. Solomon had never regretted the act, only the possibility of losing control over the narrative. Namazi spoke before Nsubuga could. You did not rescue him, she said, voice rough but steady. You curated him. The words cut deep because they were perfect. Solomon's eyes hardened. You should be careful. Namazi smiled faintly through pain. Old women who have survived this long are rarely afraid of careful men. Rainwater ran through the broken gutter beside the shelter. A plastic bag floated past like something drowned and forgotten. The driver remained near the SUV, rigid and silent, pretending not to hear. Councillor Boyer shifted his weight, already uncomfortable that the mess had become too human for paperwork. Nsubuga crouched and picked up the open letter from the metal box, still damp from his hands. He held it up. She wrote this when I was a child, he said. She told whoever had me not to let me think she left because she didn't love me. Solomon's gaze flicked to the paper and away. A letter proves sentiment, not fitness. The contempt in the last word stunned even the rain. Nsubuga stepped forward. You let me grow up believing my mother abandoned me. Do you understand what that did? Do you understand what kind of man that made me? Solomon's answer came like a door slamming shut. A successful one. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Nsubuga nodded slowly, as though some final internal argument had just ended. Thank you, he said. Solomon frowned. For what? For saying it plainly. He turned to Namazi, gentling at once. Can you stand? With help. He set down the box, took off his suit jacket, and draped it over her shoulders before offering both hands. She looked at him, at the soaked shirt, the mud on his trousers, the face no longer armored by pride, and let him lift her carefully to her feet. Solomon stepped forward. Nsubuga. No, you are not thinking clearly. I am thinking more clearly than I ever have. This woman is unstable, and carrying a grudge old enough to poison anything she touches. Namazi swayed slightly. Nsubuga steadied her with one arm around her back. She is carrying evidence, he said. The poison came from your house. Councillor Boyer finally intervened in the oily tone of a man trained to make indecency sound administrative. Perhaps everyone would benefit from a private discussion tomorrow, at home, with documents reviewed properly. Nsubuga stared at him. You mean in the house where my history was manufactured? That is not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant. He bent to collect the metal box and handed it to Namazi, who clutched it to her chest. Then he looked at the lawyer with quiet disgust. If you touch one paper in this box, I will make sure every court in this city learns your name. Boyer shut his mouth. Solomon's composure cracked at last. You are choosing humiliation. No, Nsubuga said. You chose that years ago. I am choosing truth. A burst of coughing bent Namazi nearly double. Blood darkened the corner of her mouth again. Whatever argument remained died instantly. Nsubuga tightened his hold. Enough. She needs a doctor. Solomon's face changed not to concern, but to alarm. If she goes public from a hospital, Nsubuga stared at him in disbelief. Even now, even with blood on her lips and rain running through her hair and proof of love sitting in a rusted box, even now the man's first instinct was image. Something inside Nsubuga went cold in a way anger never could. I used to think wealth made men powerful, he said softly. But all it really did for you was preserve your cowardice. Solomon stepped forward as if to strike him, then stopped. Perhaps it was the driver watching. Perhaps it was Bwire. Perhaps it was the simple fact that Nsubuga was no longer a frightened boy on the landing outside a study. Do not do this, Solomon said, and for the first time there was strain beneath the command. Once scandal begins, it does not stop where you want it to. Nsubuga answered without hesitation. Good. That single word landed harder than a shout. He turned away from the SUV and guided Namazi toward his own car parked farther down the road. She was shivering now. He could feel how light she was, how much strength she had already spent just surviving long enough to reach him. Wait, she whispered. He looked down. What is it? Her eyes moved back toward Solomon. Not afraid, not pleading, simply measuring the man who had stolen decades from both of them. Then she said quietly enough that only Nsubuga heard, do not fight him only because you hate him. Fight him because lies like his keep happening to people who never get their children back. The sentence settled into him like iron. She still thought beyond herself, beyond revenge, beyond even this night. That was what made the shame so unbearable. He had inherited none of her grace until this moment. He opened the passenger door and helped her inside. Before closing it, he tucked the jacket tighter around her and made sure the metal box was secure on her lap. When he turned back, Solomon was still standing in the rain, umbrella, forgotten. Now water darkening his shoulders. You walk away from this, Solomon said, and you walk away from everything attached to my name. Nsubuga almost laughed. At another time, that threat would have frozen him. The schools, the introductions, the loans, the prestige, the invisible scaffolding of a life built inside another man's approval. But he had already lost something far greater under Solomon's roof. A mother, a childhood, the right to grieve honestly. So what was left to threaten? Then keep your name, he said. I was wearing it like a chain. He got into the driver's seat and started the engine. Solomon took one step toward the car. Nsubuga. This time when his adoptive father said the name, it sounded less like ownership and more like panic. Nsubuga lowered the window halfway. There is one thing you should know, he said. Tomorrow I am not hiding this, not from lawyers, not from churches, not from the city. I will start with the records, then the staff who remember, then every person you ever taught to call theft by a gentler name. Solomon's face hardened into fury. You would destroy your own family. Nsubuga met his eyes through the rain. No, he said. I'm going to expose the people who destroyed it. He drove away. For several minutes there was only the road, the rain, and Namazi's ragged breathing beside him. Kampala blurred in streaks of amber and black. Streetlights passed like witnesses. He drove one-handed at times so he could steady her when coughing shook her body. He called ahead to a private clinic he partly funded but rarely visited himself. His voice was calm, his instructions precise. Emergency intake, respiratory distress, no delays, no press, no one admitted without his permission. When they reached the clinic, nurses were already waiting under the awning. He rushed around to open her door, but Namazi caught his wrist before the staff could lift her to the wheelchair. Nsubuga. He bent close. Her eyes, though clouded with exhaustion, remained fiercely present. Listen to me carefully. I'm listening. If I sleep and do not wake you, must not let your sorrow become another wall. Promise me. Pain shot through him. Do not say that. Promise me. He could not breathe properly, but he nodded. No, she whispered. Say it. Rain dripped from his hair onto the clinic tiles. He knelt in front of her, heedless of the nurses, the guards, the world. I promise. Only then did she release his wrist. They wheeled her inside. The emergency doors closed between them, with a soft, mechanical hiss. And for the first time in his adult life, Nsubuga stood in a corridor with nothing to command, nothing to buy, nothing to control, only the crushing weight to learn whether truth had reached him in time. Hospitals stripped power from people with brutal efficiency. In boardrooms, Nsubuga could shape outcomes with a glance. In his restaurant, a raised eyebrow was enough to make managers rearrange an entire evening. In the city, his name opened doors before his hand touched them. But in the corridor outside the respiratory unit, none of that mattered. He sat alone beneath white fluorescent lights, while machines beeped behind closed doors and nurses moved past with the focused indifference of people too familiar with suffering to dramatize it. His shirt was still damp from the rain. Mud had dried along the hem of his trousers. One cuff bore a small brown stain from Namadzi's blood. He had noticed it 3 times already, and still could not stop looking at it. On the plastic chair beside him sat the metal box. He had not let it out of his sight. Every few minutes his phone lit up with calls he refused to answer. First Naledi, then Solomon, then Council Bwaya, then 2 board members from a hospitality venture that had nothing to do with this night, but had likely heard some fragment of it already. By midnight, messages began arriving instead, carefully worded polite, on the surface urgent underneath. We need to speak before this gets out. Let us handle this quietly. Do not make emotional decisions with legal consequences. He deleted none of them. He simply let them collect like flies. At one point, Tendo arrived from Akisa breathless and still in his work clothes. Sir, he said softly. Stopping a respectful distance away, I came as soon as I heard. Nsubuga looked up. Tendo's face held something rare concern, not for scandal, not for the brand, not for the next day's reservations, but for him. How did you hear Auntie Rehema called? She said you might need someone who is not afraid of rich people. Despite everything, the corner of Nsubuga's mouth moved. That sounds like her. Tendo sat beside him without speaking for a while. Together they listened to the distant sounds of the clinic. The squeak of trolley wheels, a child crying in another ward, a cleaner's broom dragging across tiles. Ordinary noises. Mercilessly ordinary. The world kept going while his life split open. Finally, Tendo glanced at the box. Is that hers? It's hers, Nsubuga said. Then, after a pause, and mine. Tendo did not ask more. That loyalty quiet, unperformed, pressed unexpectedly against Nsubuga's chest. Tomorrow, Nsubuga said, still staring ahead. Things will get ugly. Tendo nodded. I assumed so. There may be reporters, lawyers, people trying to protect themselves. I assumed that too. Nsubuga turned to him at last. Why are you still here? Tendo met his eyes. Because you look like a man standing in a storm without knowing which direction is home. The answer nearly undid him. He looked away first. Just before 1 a.m, the attending doctor approached. Middle-aged, direct, with tired eyes that had probably delivered too much truth to too many families. She's stable for now, he said, but barely. Severe infection, long neglect, malnutrition. Lung damage that has gone untreated too long. Will she live? The doctor did not insult him with false comfort. She may. She may not. The next 24 hours matter. Nsubuga stood too fast. Can I see her? For a minute. The room was dim and cold. Namazi lay beneath thin blankets, oxygen under her nose. Skin made even more delicate by hospital light. Yet when Nsubuga stepped inside, her eyelids opened almost at once. It startled him. Even now, some part of her was listening for him. You should rest, he whispered. She gave the faintest smile. You said that like a mother. His throat tightened. He moved to the bedside. The doctor says you need strength. Then you should stop looking like a man preparing for a funeral. He let out a breath that almost became a laugh. Her hand lay on the blanket, small and tired. He reached for it carefully, as though the wrong pressure might cause pain. Her fingers curled weakly around his. "I need you to stay," he said. She studied him. "Need is a humbling teacher, isn't it?" "Yes." He expected pity in her answer. Instead, she squeezed his hand as best she could. "Good. Then perhaps you are ready." "For what?" "To stop living as if being loved once made you weak." The words slipped inside him with devastating precision. He had spent years worshipping invulnerability because the alternative felt like being left behind again. He had mistaken hardness for safety, control for dignity, distance for strength. And now the woman he had wronged most was lying in a hospital bed using her last reserves not to accuse him, but to rescue what remained human in him. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted. "You cannot fix years," she said. "You can only decide what kind of man speaks after them." He lowered his head until their joined hands touched his forehead for a second. A gesture older than pride, older than wealth. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Namazi closed her eyes briefly. "I know." When he left the room, Solomon was waiting at the far end of the corridor. Of course he was. The older man stood near the window in a dark coat, looking impossibly composed for someone whose life was beginning to fray. Two security men lingered by the lift, pretending not to be there. Counsel Boyer was absent, perhaps sent to manage the legal front now that the emotional one had failed. Nsubuga walked toward Solomon slowly, the metal box now under one arm. "You found the clinic quickly," he said. "You fund half the private institutions in this district." Solomon replied, "It wasn't difficult. Why are you here?" Solomon's face remained stern, but something brittle showed through. "To prevent you from destroying yourself out of anger." Nsubuga stopped in front of him. "You still think this is about anger?" "It is about impulse," Solomon said. "The world is not interested in your pain. It is interested in scandal. And scandal eats everyone." "No," Nsubuga said quietly. "Truth does that. Scandal is just what liars call the bill when it arrives." Solomon exhaled sharply. Enough with moral theater. That phrase did it. Nsubuga opened the metal box and pulled out the child's photograph. Then the letter. Then the church receipt. He held them between them like a mirror. "She wrote my name," he said. "She described my necklace. She came back for me. Repeatedly. Kato remembers. Rehema remembers seeing her search. The church volunteer knows her story. You are already outnumbered by memory." Solomon's gaze moved across the papers, then away. Memories are weak evidence. Kato's testimony isn't. A flicker. Small, but real. There it was. The first sign that Solomon had begun calculating not how to deny, but how much could still be contained. Nsubuga saw it, and felt something colder than rage settle into clarity. "You're worried now," he said. "I am practical. You are frightened." Solomon stepped closer. "Listen to me carefully. If you drag this into the open, you will not walk away clean either. Your name is tied to ours. Your businesses are tied to our networks. Your restaurant rose because doors opened for you." "Yes," Nsubuga said. "And now I know what those doors were built on." Solomon's voice dropped. "You think the city will admire you for exposing your own family? They will tear you apart. They will say you are ungrateful, unstable, manipulated by a sick woman looking for money. Then let them speak. You are naive." "No," Nsubuga said. "I was naive when I thought gratitude meant silence. They stood facing each other in the harsh, clinic light, one man clinging to control the other, discovering that the loss of it might be freedom. At last, Solomon changed tactics. When he spoke again, his tone softened into something almost paternal. "I did love you." The sentence might once have shattered him. Now it only made him tired. "I believe Insabuga said that you loved the version of me that never asked who I belonged to before you." Solomon said nothing. Insabuga took out his phone, opened the voice recorder, and held it up between them. "Say it again," he said. "Say whatever version of your truth you want preserved." For the first time that night, Solomon actually stepped back. The movement was small, but it revealed everything. Insabuga gave a bleak nod and lowered the phone. "That's what I thought." He turned away. Solomon's voice followed him harder now. "If you do this, do not expect to inherit anything from me." Insabuga stopped, then looked over his shoulder. "Inherit," he said. "You already took the only inheritance that mattered." He walked away before Solomon could answer. By dawn he had made his decision fully, not in rage, not in grief alone, in responsibility. He called 3 people in sequence. First, a journalist he once distrusted because she had a reputation for digging where powerful people preferred polished surfaces. Her name was Achieng, and she answered on the second ring with a wary voice. "I have a story," Insabuga said. "That sentence usually comes from people who want to plant something. This one can be verified." A pause. "Then I'm listening." Second, he called a senior records officer at St. Bartholomew's Church Archive, an old man who owed him nothing and therefore might still be honest. He requested immediate review of historic intake logs, private adoption notes, and any off-book correspondence around the year he had been registered abandoned. Third, he called Ekisa. Tendo answered, sounding as though he had not slept. "Sir, gather the full staff at noon. Everyone. Front, kitchen. Security, I'm making a statement." There was a brief silence. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "What should I tell them it's about?" Insabuga looked through the clinic window into the waking grey morning. Nurses changing shift. Rainwater still clinging to the pavement outside. A city stretching itself toward another day of bargains, deceptions, prayers, hunger. Tell them, he said, it's about truth entering the building. At noon, Ekisa no longer felt like his fortress. It felt like a courtroom made of glass and gold. The full staff stood gathered in the dining room, waiters, hosts, chefs, cleaners, guards, dishwashers, managers. Auntie Rahema stood in front with flour still dusting one sleeve. Tendo hovered near the side, tense but steady. 2 food suppliers lingered awkwardly by the entrance, sensing drama. Outside, through the windows, Insabuga could already see 1 camera crew and 3 curious bystanders. Fast. So fast. But maybe truth had always been waiting for a crack. Insabuga walked to the center of the room. No podium, no notes. He looked at the polished floor where he had once humiliated his mother and let the shame steady him. "When I built this restaurant," he began, "I told myself it stood for discipline, excellence, and dignity. But a place cannot carry dignity if the man leading it has none." Every person in the room went still. He drew 1 slow breath. "The woman some of you saw me throw out was not a stranger. She is my mother." Shock moved through the staff like electricity. Hands flew to mouths. Someone whispered, "Ya Allah." One waiter sat down abruptly as if his knees had failed. Insabuga did not stop. "I was raised to believe she abandoned me." That story was a lie. She was separated from me. She searched for me for years. And I, ignorant of the truth, repeated cruelty against her with my own hands. His voice nearly broke on the last sentence, but he forced it through. "I am saying this publicly because hiding it would make me the same kind of man who benefited from the lie in the first place." No one spoke. Even the city outside seemed to pause at the windows. Insabuga looked from face to face, some shocked, some grieving already for him, some furious on his behalf, some ashamed for having watched and said nothing. Then he said the words that changed the room forever. "From this day on, no hungry person will ever be thrown out of a kisa again." For several seconds after Nisubuga spoke, no one in a kisa moved. The chandeliers glowed above polished tables. Afternoon light spilled through the tall glass windows. Outside, the first camera crew pressed closer to the entrance, sensing the weight of whatever was happening inside. But in the dining room itself, silence held everything still. Then Auntie Rehema began to cry. Not loudly, not theatrically, just one hand over her mouth, shoulders trembling, eyes full of the kind of grief reserved for truths that should have arrived years earlier. Tendo looked as though he had forgotten how to breathe. One of the younger waitresses whispered, his mother, as if saying it too loudly might shatter him. Nsubuga stood in the center of the room and let them see him without armor. No polished executive smile, no commanding stare, no distance. Shame had already stripped all that away. What remained was a son standing where a proud man had once stood, trying to build something honest from the ruins. He spoke again, steadier now. "I am not asking for sympathy," he said. "I am asking for change." His gaze moved across the staff. The guards near the entrance lowered their eyes first. They had followed orders. They had pushed away beggars before. They had done it because he paid them to protect the image of the place. Nsubuga knew that. The guilt was theirs in fragments. The design of the cruelty had been his. Starting today, he continued, there will be a food counter at the side entrance every evening. No one who is hungry will be turned away, not because it is good for business, not because it makes us look kind, because hunger is not a crime, and this building will stop acting like it is. Murmuses rose now, emotional and uneven. A dishwasher at the back wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. One of the hostesses nodded before she even realized she was doing it. Auntie Rehema stepped forward first. "What about the woman?" she asked softly. Your mother, Nisubuga's face changed at once. He had not slept. He had spent the morning between the clinic and the church records office and then come here without rest. Yet the sharpest pain in him was still the uncertainty. "She is alive," he said. "For now." The last two words darkened the room. Rehema bowed her head. "Then may God leave the door open a little longer." Nsubuga did not trust himself to answer. At that moment the front doors opened, and two reporters tried to enter at once, followed by a cameraman and a man from a radio station. Security moved instinctively to block them, but Nsubuga lifted a hand. "Let them in." Tendo looked alarmed. "Sir, let them in." The reporters entered with that familiar mix of urgency and appetite eyes, searching for scandal before compassion. One of them, a sharp-faced woman in a navy blazer, raised a microphone immediately. "Mr. Okello, is it true that the homeless woman involved in the incident is claiming to be your biological mother?" Nsubuga looked at her calmly. "Not Mr. Okello." The woman blinked. "Sorry, my name is Nsubuga Namazi." The sentence landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Not loud, but impossible to ignore. The cameras adjusted. Pens lifted. Even the staff turned fully toward him now. He had never publicly rejected the Okello name before. Not once. In one breath he had walked away from inheritance, access, protection, and all the invisible prestige attached to it. The reporter recovered quickly. "Are you saying you have proof I am saying an investigation is underway? I am also saying that I publicly mistreated a woman who has suffered for years because powerful people rewrote her story. That woman is in the hospital. She deserves dignity, not speculation." Another reporter jumped in. "Are you accusing Solomon Okello of kidnapping illegal adoption fraud? I am accusing the rich of believing they can turn desperation into consent. Nsubuga replied. I am accusing people with power of calling theft rescue when the victim is too poor to fight back. The records will speak, witnesses will speak, and I will speak. It was not the neat answer they wanted. It was better. The camera lights stayed fixed on him. Outside, more people had begun gathering beyond the windows. Drivers, vendors, office workers slowing down. Kampala could smell a story now. One reporter asked, "Why go public now?" Nsubuga did not look away. Because secrecy protected the wrong people for too long. He gave no more after that. No details from the letters. No descriptions of Homel3ss coughing blood beneath the shelter. No broken confessions from the night before. Those belonged first to truth, then to law, then to conscience, not to spectacle. He dismissed the press and turned back to his staff. Anyone who does not wish to be part of these changes may leave with full pay for the month, he said. Anyone who stays will help build something very different from what this place has been. No one moved toward the door. Auntie Rahema, still crying a little, gave him a look both fierce and maternal. Then stop talking and go to your mother. So he did. By late afternoon, the church records officer had called. Nsubuga stood in the clinic hallway when the old man's voice crackled through the line. I found entries, he said. Not formal ones. Supplemental notes. A correction inserted later. There is enough here to ask serious questions. Questions about what a child originally listed as temporarily surrendered for emergency care, the officer replied. Later re-entered as abandoned. Different handwriting. No supporting witness signatures. And there is one more thing. Nsubuga closed his eyes. What a note referencing private arrangements requested by a donor family. There it was. Not proof complete enough to heal the years, but proof enough to break the lie open in public daylight. By evening, a legal complaint had begun forming. Achieng, the journalist, had already spoken to 2 former church workers and 1 retired gate guard willing to talk anonymously. Councillor Boyer had issued a vague statement denying misinterpretations of a compassionate family history. Solomon had retreated behind lawyers. Naledi had sent 1 message, "Only I never stopped loving you." Nsubuga read it once, then turned off his phone. Inside Homel3ss' hospital room, the light was soft and golden. She was awake, weaker, but lucid. And for the first time since he had found her, there was less struggle in her breathing. A nurse had combed her hair back gently. The metal box sat on the bedside table. The brass necklace lay beside it now. Nsubuga pulled a chair close and sat. I made a public statement, he said. Homel3ss looked at him for a moment. That sounds dangerous. It was. And necessary. Yes. That faint, knowing smile touched her mouth again. Then perhaps you are finally mine. His eyes burned. He took the necklace and placed it gently in her palm. You kept everything. I had little else. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the machine's steady rhythm. Outside the window, the city was dimming toward evening. Somewhere people were cooking supper. Somewhere else someone was already repeating the story with details wrong and emotion exaggerated. But here in this small room none of that mattered. Nsubuga lowered his head. I cannot get back the years, he said. I know that. No. I cannot undo what I said to you. No. I cannot forgive myself yet. Homel3ss turned her head toward him. That one will take longer. He let out a shaky breath. Then very carefully he reached for her hand. When I was small, he said, Did you really hum when I slept? She gave the tiniest laugh. You hated silence. You would grab my dress if I stopped. A tear slipped down before he could hide it. I remembered the feeling, he whispered. Not the sound. Homel3ss looked at him with such tenderness that it almost made the room unbearable. So because there was no dignity left in pretending, Nsubuga stood bent slowly and laid his head against her chest, like a child who had found the road home too late. Her hand rose to his hair, weak, trembling, still unmistakably a mother's. For a long time, neither of them spoke. When she finally did, her voice was almost too soft to hear. "My son." He closed his eyes. That was the moment he had not realized he had been starving for all his life. Not success, not status, not inheritance, just that. My son. Night deepened outside. The nurse entered, once checked the line, and left quietly when she saw them. No one interrupted again. Near midnight, Homel3ss asked him to open the window curtain a little wider so she could see the city lights. "It is beautiful from here," she murmured. "It's cruel, too." "Yes," she said, "but tonight you are changing a little piece of it." He wanted to tell her she had done that, not him. But she was tired, and truth did not always need argument. He stayed until her breathing changed. Not suddenly, not violently, just gradually, like someone setting down a weight after carrying it too long. The monitor altered first. Then the silence between breaths widened. The nurse came in quickly, then the doctor. Their movements were efficient, respectful, already knowing. And Nsubuga did not step away. He held Homel3ss's hand and stood beside her as the city she had fought against for years glowed cold beyond the window. The doctor checked once more, then looked up. "I'm sorry." Nsubuga heard the words, but they seemed to come from very far away. He looked at Homel3ss's face. All the strain had left it. No gait, no pleading, no coughing in the rain, no years of searching carved into the mouth. Only peace. He lowered himself into the chair beside the bed and wept without hiding. Not as a rich man, not as a public figure, not as a son protecting his image, just as a son. The funeral 3 days later drew far more people than Solomon expected. Church volunteers came, taxi drivers came, kitchen staff from Homel3ss came in uniforms and tears, street women came carrying flowers wrapped in newspaper. Even some of the reporters came, but quietly this time, pens lowered. Nsubuga stood at the front wearing plain black, the brass necklace around his neck for the first time in public. He did not speak long. He did not need to. "My mother was denied many things," he said, "but she will not be denied the truth of who she was. She was poor. She was wounded. She was silenced. But she was never absent. She was never faithless. She was never less worthy because she suffered." The wind moved through the burial ground. Somewhere behind him, someone began crying openly. After the burial, Nsubuga returned to Homel3ss before dawn the next day. The staff were already waiting. Without speeches, they opened the side gate. A long table stood there now with hot tea, bread, beans, and soup. Not leftovers thrown with disgust, but proper food served with dignity. The first people who approached did so carefully suspicious of kindness. A barefoot boy, an old woman with a sack over one shoulder, a man who looked like he had not slept indoors in months. Nsubuga stepped forward himself. "Come in," he said. "Not to the main dining room, not yet, but inside the gates, under shelter, to clean chairs, to hot food, to human eyes that did not look away." The old woman hesitated. Then she nodded once and entered. Morning light slowly spread across the city. Behind him, the gold sign Homel3ss caught the dawn. For the first time, the word did not taste like irony. For the first time, mercy lived there. And as Nsubuga stood at the gate, his mother had once been denied welcoming the forgotten. With his own hands, he understood the final shape of her gift. She had not only found her son, she had returned his soul to him. Some of the deepest wounds in life are not caused by what we lose, but by what we are led to believe about that loss. Nsubuga's story reminds us that truth can be buried, distorted, even stolen, but it never truly disappears. And when it finally rises, it demands courage, not comfort. He learned too late that pride can blind us, that silence can protect injustice, and that love, real love, does not always come dressed in dignity or wealth. Sometimes it comes in worn clothes, trembling hands, and a voice that refuses to forget your name. But there is still hope in this story, because even after cruelty, even after regret, even after loss, there is still a chance to choose differently, to become softer where life made you hard, to restore dignity where it was denied, to turn pain into purpose. That is where healing begins, not in perfection, but in truth and responsibility. If this story touched you, what part moved you the most? Do you think Nsubuga deserved forgiveness, or was his pain too late to matter? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your country right now.